Good morning and welcome everyone to the 24th meeting of the Culture, Tourism, Europe and External Affairs Committee and our 14th remote meeting. Our next agenda item is evidence on public sector broadcasters and commissioning. And can I welcome to the meeting our panel this morning, Alan Clements, who is the Managing Director of Two Rivers Media, Neil Webster, who is the Managing Director of Happy Tramp North, and Claire Mundell, the Creative Director and Founder of Synchronicity Films. I would remind members to give broadcasting staff a few seconds to operate your microphones before beginning to ask your question, and to our witnesses, if you could also provide broadcasting staff with a few minutes before you provide your answer, not a minute, seconds rather, and I would be grateful if questions and answers could be kept as succinct as possible. As usual with these virtual meetings, every member will have a question and a supplementary, and we will take further supplementary questions at the end of the session if time permits. The purpose of the session today is to follow up on a major piece of work that the committee did a couple of years ago, making Scotland a screen leader, where we made a number of recommendations aimed at increasing the amount of independent production made here in Scotland. We had an evidence session early March with some stakeholders, and that was our post-committee report scrutiny was curtailed a little, obviously, by the pandemic, but we're now returning to that subject. Now, I want to start by looking at the phenomenon of lift and shift, that is, whereby productions were classified as Scottish or Scotland-made productions for the purposes of meeting the public sector broadcasters' quota, but there was severe question marks over whether they really were Scottish productions. The committee recommended in its report that reporting of what makes a Scottish production should be made more robust, and that checks on the accuracy of the information provided should be tightened. Quite recently, I believe Ofcom changed the criteria for what classifies as a Scottish production, and I just wondered if the panel felt that the Ofcom guidance and its tests had improved the situation. Alan Clements, do you want to start?
Yes, thank you, convener. I think obviously I'm not Ofcom. It's hard for me to regulate what's happening with every single production. My sense is the broadcasters are trying much harder to police it themselves. Personally, I would have liked the Ofcom criteria to have gone further, but I certainly have a sense that they really, really want to make it work. And if you saw the figures this week from Channel 5, even though they have out of London quota of 10%, they're actually at 36% in the nations and regions. I think there is a sea change to try and make it work. I'm not sure I can give you detailed evidence on specific productions around, a substantial base in Scotland, but my sense is there's a real willingness to make it work.
That's encouraging. Do any of our other panellists want to comment on that?
Films. I would agree with Alan. I think that it's a journey. It's been quite a long journey to get to this point, but I think that the current definition, certainly in the scripted arena, is better than what it was. I also notice a genuine will in the broadcasters that we work with to meet their nations and regions targets. I think also, the world has changed a lot, obviously, in the last 6 months, and in many ways, the paradigm shift in the UK of the nature of the way people are facing themselves changed completely, and I think to some degree that will actually potentially play into a positive outcome for nations and regions.
Thank you very much. I think there might be somebody who is not muted. I think Alan wasn't muted, but he's now muted. There was just some feedback. Thank you very much, Claire. Neil, would you like to respond to that?
Hello. Yes, no, I agree. I agree with that, Alan and Claire. I think I'm newer to the. I haven't seen the journey as much as I'm newer to kind of Scottish production. I've been here about 3-4 years now, but I think the mindset is very much the PSBs, certainly the BBC, who we've been predominantly dealing with, have been really proactive, and I think in terms of kind of quotas in production terms, they've been really helpful, and from the productions that we've made, that seems to be working well.
Sure. Okay, well, that's all very encouraging. Certainly the briefings that we've got from some of yourselves and also from Spice shows that there is more production being made, and that the BBC Scotland channel has made a big difference, and Alan was particularly positive about that. However, when we took evidence early this year in March, there was a question mark over the amount of money that was available to individual productions. For example, Arabella Page-Croft from Back Camel Pictures said that producers were really being squeezed. She said that although we have this new channel, there's no money. For example, I've just done a $4 million deal with Sky on another series, but my current deal with BBC Scotland is for 100,000. Producers are having to go elsewhere because the money is not here, and I just wondered if there was that squeeze. I think Pac talked about that as well, and also if you could address whether the changes at BBC Studios. I understand that some of the production capacity has been taken away from BBC Scotland, and whether that's going to make a difference. Claire.
BBC Scotland channel question. I mean, I think it's really hard to, it's impossible to compare apples with pears in this scenario. You know, the channel is, I think, a really positive addition to the landscape in Scotland. We work in the scripted arena, so for us, there's limited opportunity for us with the scripted genre, because, as I'm sure the committee know, the costs involved in creating a high-end scripted series often preclude, working with the channel solely at that tariff level. But where I think the Scottish channel can be innovative, and has in fact been innovative, and Neil will obviously talk more about this, I'm sure, with Gilt, is they can strategise and champion specific projects in the scripted area and in scripted comedy. And in doing so, champion that project to the network in a way that can be really helpful. I think in terms of impact, their impact is going to be, specified in certain genres. I'm broadly positive about the channel's, growth and what have you. But would I like it to have more money? Absolutely, because its ambitions are limited. But we have to operate in a real world context, and we're all facing major challenges, specifically related to COVID, but also internationally with the dominance of the streamers. So I think again, for me, it's a journey. I've been working in Nations and Regions network television for 20 years, and I think we're much closer to achieving the sort of growth that we ought to have in Scotland. I think the channel's a good step in that direction, but it needs more money to have a significant impact. And I think they do very well with what they have, but very often on low tariffs. So I think, unfortunately, it's really hard to compare the sort of deal you would get at Sky with the kind of deal you might get at BBC Scotland, because it totally depends on the nature of the project and the genre.
Okay, thanks very much. Claire. Neil?
Yes, I totally agree with Claire. I think, as regards to Gilt, for us, BBC Scotland has been an incredible, the launch of the channel has been incredible, and the drama, as Claire says, we again, Happy Tramp North work predominantly, well, almost entirely now, in scripted comedy and drama, and because of the level of the budgets, it's high-end budgets, and so it's incredibly difficult, because you can only do a certain number of shows. Kind of main PSBs, nations commissioners can only do a certain number of shows, and BBC Scotland has great ambitions, but there's limited resources. So we were very fortunate to get Gilt off the ground with them in conjunction with BBC Two. But the budget squeeze, to answer the question about a budget squeeze, the pre-COVID budgets were tight. Post-COVID, it's going to be a whole different ballgame. But to have more money coming through BBC Scotland will only be able to increase the amount of productions that we can make. Like, I think at the moment, Gilt is a real stretch for BBC Scotland because it's a lot of money. And thankfully it was a success and everyone enjoyed it and we're making more. But it's a lot of money to put into one basket. There needs to be more baskets.
Yeah. Okay, thanks very much. And I think other members will explore the effect of COVID later on in the session. Alan, did you want to come in on that? And I don't know if you're able to address the issue of BBC Studios. There's been major changes.
Yeah, I will in a second. I mean, firstly, I'm afraid I'm going to have to violently agree with both Claire and Neil. I think what Steve Carson's team have done with the money has been extraordinary, and I think the comparison that Arabella makes is not a valid one. You cannot compare a channel with a budget of 30 odd million with someone like Sky or even ITV with a budget of $1 billion. I just don't. It's horses for courses. But we are doing a couple of major projects with BBC Scotland that are fully funded by them. And also, I think they're starting to be quite entrepreneurial about being minority funders. We're doing a major theatrical doc with a Scottish character at its heart, and their funding has helped us find other funding towards creating this cinema doc. So I have nothing but praise for them. I think they've done great. On the BBC Studios, I think it's quite difficult because it's effectively a private company within the BBC. Now, I guess they have to make the commercial decisions that they make. I think I would always regret any centralisation into London of any production, and I think it's a real shame for the production base in Scotland that these skills are being lost. But effectively now it's a commercial decision. It feels a slightly odd commercial decision given that they're encouraging other companies to move out to the nations and regions, but they themselves are retrenching back with that documentaries unit, they're retrenching it back to London. Which is a shame, but that's got to be a decision for them, a commercial decision for them now.
I see. Okay, thank you very much. I'm sure we'll have lots more questions on these themes. I'll now pass on to Claire Baker.
Thank you, convener. A couple of the witnesses have referred to COVID and the pandemic already. I think Claire sounded more optimistic about it. I thought there might be opportunities. But I wondered what the impact has been on the sector and on independent production, and how you see the sector having to adapt to what might be a long-term situation. And maybe if Claire wants to respond first as she raised the issue.
Sure. Well, again, in the scripted arena, we have very much focused on what we can control. The only thing we can control at the moment, which is development over the last few months. And we've used the period to really work on making sure that we have sufficient product, because that's what we make at the end of the day, on our slate to sell to the broadcasters and to funders around the world, at the appropriate time. It's very hard to see how, certainly in the scripted arena, things will return to any kind of normal in the short term. I think in the longer term, 3 to 5 years, I'm optimistic that we may return to the levels we were at previously. But I think in the immediate term and in the medium term, it's about adjusting what we do to the new reality. COVID is a new reality. It's no longer an exceptional cost already. It is considered a cost of production. And production companies on the whole are having to bear that cost. I believe during the middle of the pandemic, when projects were in production, there was some additional funding to help cover those unforeseen additional costs. But now we all know that it's the, I hate the expression new normal, but sorry to use it, but there it is. And so therefore it is just considered a cost. So it's a significant cost, and it's anywhere from 15 to 25% on top of the cost of just making your production in scripted, at least. And therefore that is going to put pressure on margins for production companies. It's going to change, I think, the nature of the editorial. You'll have noticed perhaps in the last week that Netflix has cancelled a number of shows which are based on ensemble casts because the risk profile is too great. I think you'll see much fewer multi-territory international filming. We've been going through a period in high-end television where international production has been, booming. And I think it can still boom, but it's going to boom in a different way now, because I think all the broadcasters are going to do everything they can, understandably, to protect their investment by focusing on projects which are perhaps restricted to filming in one territory. That won't help the issue of funding high-end drama, because high-end drama relies on, a commissioning broadcaster, typically for us in the UK, but not always. Sometimes that commissioning broadcaster could be in Australia, Germany, the US, and then piecing together the rest of the puzzle. So the finance challenge is still going to be there, but without editorially being able to have, characters in some of those territories, we will have to find a way of balancing out how we make those projects attractive internationally. Obviously, COVID has been devastating for the freelance community. There are many crew members who have literally not earned a penny for 6 months, and that's going to change the shape of the talent base here. Some people will leave the industry because nobody wants to be exposed to this level of risk again. I think from a production company point of view, we have hunkered down and, as I say, focused on development. Fortunately, we weren't hit by production, but we are aiming to shoot before the end of the year, and the recently announced reinsurance programme is a welcome addition to the challenges that we face. But we're all going to have to cut our cloth to fit. We're going to have to think about the sorts of stories that we tell, how many characters are in a drama, how many locations are you using. I'm an optimist. I don't think you can be a producer without being a pathological optimist. You just wouldn't do it. But so I therefore see opportunities in new technology when it comes to drama. I think the audience the audience demand the same level of quality and ambition that they've become used to. And we have to serve the audience ultimately. We're in a business of delivering something that they want to watch. So that is going to push us all into exploring new technology and the ways in which new technology can help us achieve scale and ambition in drama, but in a safe way that puts nobody at risk. So, there are lots of challenges ahead for sure, and I think there will be a rationalising of the production base. Sadly, I think, some companies that were perhaps not viable anyway might not make it through, and, it's a constant juggling act to make sure that you can keep going, and certainly in drama, which takes a very, very long lead time to develop. But if you can stay in the game long enough, the rewards are extremely high, and that is what builds value, and that is what I think we need to do in Scotland. We need to build IP value and wealth creation through IP value on the ground here, from creators here and production companies here. Sorry, I kind of segued into a whole other thing there, but COVID is a reckoning for sure, but we have to adapt. Television professionals and crews and talented individuals who make productions are very adaptable, flexible people, and we have to adapt the way we work and our methodology. But is it a challenge? Absolutely. And I think in the scripted arena, you won't see major series being made in the same way as before. I think we'll have to change the way we make them, and also the sorts of stories, the way we put stories together.
Okay, thank you, Claire. I don't know if Neil or Alan would like to comment. I imagine you will agree with a lot of what Claire has already said, and I think she's laid out some of the key issues around freelancers and concerns around viability of some parts of the sector. In responding to that, could you maybe also reflect a bit on into the BBC as the main public sector broadcaster? There are changes at the BBC. We have a new Director General, we're awaiting the appointment of a chair, and there will be a new lead at Ofcom as well. If you have any views on how, in response to COVID, where the public sector broadcaster, where you would hope they will put an emphasis. And Alan earlier said that he felt there was a sea change in terms of regional investment. Do you think that will? Do you have any concerns that that might not continue under new leadership, or are you confident that as a direction the BBC will remain in? Alan, would you like to go first, and then I could bring Neil in?
Yeah, thank you, Claire. Yeah, I'm delighted to do that. I think there's no point to go over everything that Claire said about COVID. I would agree with all of it, and particularly around the costs, because everything just takes longer if you're checking temperatures and you can only remote film and remote edit, particularly in factual. But we have kept going, but it is definitely more expensive. I think the BBC, I mean, I have praised the BBC. I do think they mean it this time, and I do think the BBC Scotland has been a significant help to the sector in Scotland. But I would return to the point that I gave in my written evidence, that the one area that has been disappointing, and they have made a lot of, well, more than noises, promises about, is actually the decentralisation of decision making, which I think is absolutely critical to helping the sector in Scotland. And I gave the example of when Joe Street, from Doncaster, who moved up from London and could commission, not just develop, but sign off commissions along with the channel controller. And what that did to the daytime and early peak production from Scotland was enormous, because she was here. She knew the companies, their strengths, their weaknesses, and she was here. And what Charlotte Moore said at the Nations and Regions conference in Leeds was they weren't going to do a big bang like Channel 4 and actually move the Leeds and Glasgow and Bristol. They were going to do it organically. Well, it feels to me that there has been no organic progress, and in many ways they've actually retreated a bit. So Craig Hunter, who was here as a commissioner for Specialist Factual, has now gone to work for STV Productions, STV Studios, and his two replacements, both of them, Tom Coveney and Emma Cusack, both excellent commissioners, but they're both in London. And they are now representing Scotland within the BBC factual commissioning. And I think you do have to get people out into the actual nations and regions, so they're dealing with the companies directly. And if people go, the money and the commissioning power will follow them. And I think that's absolutely critical. And I hope Tim Davie will pick up that challenge and start to move the BBC in that direction. Because that's the real fundamental change. Because I think they've made a change of mindset, that they do trust nations and regions producers, but they now have to take that next step that Channel 4 has already taken, and start to move decision makers out.
Thank you. Neil, would you like to comment on the COVID situation or the BBC?
Yes, please. I'd like to comment on both. Again, I couldn't agree more with Claire and Alan re-COVID. I think probably from our perspective, as a very small production company, the increased margins, it's a high wire act. Now we're about to go into production on two shows, fingers crossed, all being well, in November, and it's, even with the reinsurance programme, we're going into uncharted territory, and there are so many things that could fall down at so many stages of production, because obviously keeping people safe is the main priority. But as Claire's pointed out, drama production is hugely costly, has a huge machine around it, and it only takes one part of the machine to falter, and we're left kind of high and dry. So I think it really is, certainly for us, everybody is desperate to get back into production, because we haven't made any money over the last 6 months, and just kind of, it's a kind of existential point of our working life now, where we have to get into production, we have to make it work. We have, with the increased margins and the increased risk, we just getting through production is the key thing for the next 4 or 5 months. And I think we're all going to learn a lot, and it's been great sharing information between companies up here as people are learning things. But it is a precarious time, even for successful shows like, go back to Guilt returning. We can't wait to make the show, and we've been lucky enough that we've got a writer who is responding to the problems of COVID, that comes down to the minutiae of plots and drama, where you suddenly go, we can't have two people in a car. We can't shoot two people in the car safely at the moment. So how do we reimagine that scene? So there's lots of those elements that we're really wrestling with on a day-to-day basis. And to come to the BBC point and Alan's point about the decentralisation of decision making, I think, one of the upsides of COVID at the moment, if there are any, are Zoom and Blue Jeans are democratising those meetings because of the previous culture of everyone. When I first moved here, everyone told me about I think it was the £250 coffee is where you go to London for a meeting and have a coffee and then come back again. And there was a lot of that, and I've experienced a fair amount of that. Hopefully this explodes that, and we can now work in a way where we can pitch to people and we can have this contact. There's always that you always miss something with the human contact, but this hopefully will level the playing field on that level. In terms of the decentralisation, I think one of the big issues that you always find is that when you dilute the commissioning power, when there has to be a kind of two-prong, when, if you're making a show between BBC Scotland and BBC Two, if you're diluting the commissioning power, that also slows down the speed of decision making, which is crucial, certainly for small companies. That, as Claire said, the lead time on making scripted programmes is huge. There's a huge development period. And then often, because there's a decentralised commissioning, there has to be more than two ticks, and that really slows down. And that makes it precarious for small producers, because we end up waiting much longer.
That's great. Thank you very much, Convener.
Okay, thank you very much. We now move to Ross Greer.
Thank you, Convener. Just move my screen a wee bit. I'm interested in sticking with the issues around the short-term impact of COVID and what impact it might have had on commissions that were being negotiated or had just been secured by March when the lockdown happened, and then production couldn't commence. Have these productions, have whoever commissioned it, whether it's the PSBs or any other provider, are they still holding on to those, or are you finding that production companies in the sector are losing out on business that was previously either just about to be secured or had been secured because the channels are cancelling those commissions? They've decided not to move ahead with production that previously would have happened in March, April, May?
Jump in to say that we haven't had direct experience of that because we were not in production at that particular point in scripted. But I do know of other companies who have had a variety of responses. In some cases, those productions have been, postponed until into next spring. In some cases, those productions have been cancelled because, for various reasons, those particular shows and the risk profile around those shows no longer feel achievable in the current climate. And it's really very much a project by project thing, and it really depends on, I think, the genre as well. I think in factual, we don't make any factual programmes, so I can't speak to that, but in factual, my understanding is, there have been ways to stay in production with planned programmes, and also very many innovative responses to the new reality of filming with COVID. But yeah, I certainly know that there have been some cancellations of shows, and for those companies in the scripted area who have had their shows postponed, that's a big challenge as well, since the production company does not earn any significant, meaningful income until first day principal photography, really. So, these are cash flow challenges which are very acute.
Thank you. Do Alan or Neil have any particular experience of that, or any patterns that you've heard of other companies?
Projects being cancelled anecdotally, Ross. We were lucky in the, give you two examples. We are filming a series and now editing a series about inside Tynecastle following Hearts season, which didn't turn out quite as I think anybody expected. And the BBC have supported that production continuing, even though it was meant to finish in filming in May. And there'll be some cost to us and some cost to the BBC. With the Dick and Angel's Escape to the Chateau, Make Do and Mend, it was actually a different format when we started, but we adapted it to lockdown, and it worked very well. It was a very successful show for them, and actually we're talking to them about, do we do more of them, even though it was a lockdown show. So basically people were sending in their video DIY or craft problems, and Dick and Angel were dealing with them from the Chateau, but it gets such a great response from the audience, a non-lockdown show. So we've, I think, been quite fortunate that, and the broadcasters have been very understanding and worked very collaboratively. I think the problem is, and it puzzled my investors, is that often you start productions without a contract being fully signed, because that's the nature of how the television has always worked. In fact, I've actually had shows transmitted before the contract for production has been signed, and I think some companies were caught in that by the letter of the law rather than the spirit of the law, is my understanding, but I couldn't give you chapter and verse in it.
Hi. Just to add to that, I think on a practical level, there's been, with everything kind of shutting down and pausing, there's a domino effect, and there's a kind of practical element now where we're all desperately trying to get back into production as we're kind of working our way through the COVID protocols. And now, just from our perspective, just from a point of kind of to take actors as one element, all of the jobs that the actors were meant to do between March and September, now every one of those companies is desperate to make those shows, obviously, because as Claire said, there's no real money till principal photography, so you need to be in production as soon as possible. But there's a real practical glut now where everybody's just trying to get into production with the same resources that would normally be spread across a year. So it makes it incredibly difficult. So not just kind of the postponement of productions due to, the landscape's change, there's also just the practicality of everyone now trying to work with the same resources that would normally be spread across the whole year in the next 3 or 4 months.
Thanks. I can see Claire wanting to come back in, I think.
Just to add, Ross, that the other issue, of course, that we all face with the knock-on effect of productions being pushed along the line is that in terms of commissioning opportunities, real commissioning opportunities, the terrestrial broadcasters obviously are still mainly operating linear channels with slots, and that means that new opportunities are now well into 23, if not 24 in some cases, and that's a long time for companies to be able to sustain their businesses and still be available to compete for those projects. Now, there's so many buyers now for drama, and we talk to broadcasters and funders all over the world. I think that Zoom, as Alan said in his paper, has absolutely democratised those conversations, and in the interim we've also saved money actually from having to do the £250 coffee. But it's a constant juggling act between rushing into whatever kind of production you can in order to get that principal photography fee and the start of income, and also competing for projects with every other company, not just in the UK but internationally, for slots that are in many cases 2 years down the line. Drama typically takes 12 to 18 months to make, so there's a certain amount of lead time such as that we always have to contend with. But now, it's definitely pushing, I think, many of us to look at opportunities in the streamers arena, because they obviously are probably the main entities that are benefiting massively out of COVID, because they have endless demand and endless audience needs, and audience available to view like never before. So it's a balancing act, because whilst we can gain good production fees on streamer commissions, we don't have any back end, and back end is what builds value, and that is ultimately what will build sustainability in Scotland.
Great, thank you. Convener, would you like me to come in on the role of Screen Scotland now or come back to that later?
Well, if we have time, we could come back to it later. Is that okay? We'll now move on to Oliver Mundell. Oliver?
There we go. Thank you, Convener. I was just waiting for my camera to turn on. I'm interested in what the panellists think about how well public service broadcasting in Scotland reflects the whole country and in the kind of equality of opportunity that's available for all communities and regions of Scotland. From the area I represent, sometimes there's a feeling that the BBC and others can be very focused on the central belt and that we don't see kind of all the different parts of Scotland well reflected, and if they think there's anything that can be done to improve that.
If I could come in on that, I absolutely agree. I think in the central belt of Scotland, we're sometimes as guilty of the very thing that we have decried London of for many years. We just don't see it ourselves. I think there are definite challenges to it from a practical point of view, because the bulk of the crew base is based in the central belt between Glasgow and Edinburgh. But we have to overcome that. I think we need to talk about diversity in a Scottish sense. We have to talk about social inclusion. I think that all of these things are absolutely, part and parcel of what we have to deliver to the audience, as well as, considering developing the industry. I also think that, again, to go back to what we want to watch on television, we all respond to material that is authentic and has a very clear sense of place, but perhaps has universal themes that we can all relate to. And I think we don't make enough of that in Scotland. I think the other thing is, from an international point of view, we completely underestimate the extent to which, the landscape of Scotland and the remoteness of parts of Scotland and the distinctiveness of parts of Scotland is a massive sell to the international market, and in particular to the US market. And very often we on the ground I don't think we exploit that as much as we should. I mean, so I think there's a kind of there's a moral duty and an industry duty to do all of those things, but there's also a good commercial imperative to do it, because it's what makes us distinctive within the UK, and we ought to, harness it more.
I don't know if anyone else.
Yes. I think, and Claire's, I totally agree with Claire. I think that with the central belt and the centralisation, I think it is, it's the same issue that you have in the UK and London, that most of the resources are currently found in those places. So it's a resource issue as much as anything else. I'm up north. I'm along the coast of Inverness, and we're currently developing some documentary strands, and again speaking to the kind of stories up here and the landscape. And there's incredible stories to tell and incredible places to tell them. But it's a resource issue as much as anything, because people move to areas where the work is, and so to build a kind of small team up here, it's hard, because when people want to find work, they'll go to the central areas. So the central belt is where you'll be. You'll be in Glasgow. If we want to crew up, Glasgow's where we go. So I think it is building things up from small starts. The slight issue with that, probably more so at the moment with COVID, is that building things up from small starts is a big time and energy investment for not a lot of return. And so you tend to find yourself gravitating back towards a bigger show. How can I get a show off the ground that will pay for it? And so then that draws you back to the bigger central areas. But the ambition is very much to build stories, certainly from our perspective up here, in kind of dramatic terms, but also in documentary terms.
Right. And I guess.
Sorry, I was going to say, I agree with all that. Having grown up in Stranraer, I understand what it feels like to be remote from the central belt. And I think there is a laziness sometimes in decision making. But certainly on our scripted side, we are very focused on setting shows outside of Glasgow. And to be fair to BBC Scotland, I know on at least 2 occasions they've turned down shows from us because they don't want any more Glasgow stories. So they've tried very hard to have, particularly in their factual output, stories that are not based only in Glasgow and only in certain communities.
Thank you for that. I think that's helpful. I was interested in whether you felt that there was more, for example, our enterprise agencies could do in the Highlands and Islands and in the south of Scotland to incentivise new production in those regions, and whether you think that that would help encourage the skill base to develop.
Say that I think one of the things that would be incredibly helpful, possibly transformative, and I've banged on about this for many years, is local incentives which could top up the UK tax credit. Some time ago in Dumfries and Galloway, there was a very forward-thinking individual whose name escapes me now, Mark Geddes, that was him, and he had a relatively modest pot of money which came from the tourism budget, I believe, and he used that pot of money to incentivise us to go to that part of Scotland to base projects there. I don't have the figures to hand, but I remember being told them at one time, and his return on his 100,000 in terms of the amount of production spend that went to Dumfries and Galloway was enormous. And we are very we're not shy in coming forward when it comes to following the money. I think that would have a massive that would make a massive difference, and it would give Scotland a competitive advantage over other parts of the UK as well. Even a small percentage or a fixed amount of money that goes towards in return for spend in that local area would be incredible, and that would drive change because we follow the money. Everybody does. So I think that's a definite thing to examine. And if you look at the model in Dumfries and Galloway, you'll see. Unfortunately, we all understand the pressures and budgets, and even more so now. So it perhaps seems, somewhat selfish to be asking for more money, but a small amount of investment from local regions would absolutely drive people to go there. And we have evidence that can back that up based on what happened in Dumfries and Galloway.
Yeah, that's me, convener, if no one else has anything else to add.
Thank you very much. We'll now move to Beatrice.
Thank you, convener, and good morning, panel. I was interested, particularly in that last line of questioning, obviously wanting to make sure that the Highlands and Islands benefit as well as the Central Belt. And we're hoping, we've still got fingers crossed, that the new series of Shetland, which is due to start production in February next year, so we just have to wait and see where that goes. Obviously, that's been a successful series, and also has done enormous good for our tourism industry. But I was particularly interested in terms of diversity and encouraging fresh new talent. So I was wanting the panel's opinion on how we continue to nurture Scottish talent and enable the progression given the sort of financial constraints that we're obviously going to experience in terms of COVID. So, Alan, I thought your paper, you were quite strong on that, and I wonder if you could maybe expand a bit more, please.
Yeah, very happy to do it, Beatrice. Thank you very much. I think there's kind of a micro and a macro level in this. On the micro level, one of the great frustrations of working from home and not having an office is we've had to cease a lot of our mentoring activities, and we take that, our mentees, really seriously, and we really want to reach out to communities that are not very well served in the television industry. There is a huge issue around BAME communities, clearly, but often in that there's a loss of focus on class and socioeconomic exclusion, and we're really keen to tackle that as a company. And I think my broader point, going back to the decentralisation of decision making, is that if you can build big industries in Sheffield and in Coventry and in Belfast and in Aberdeen and in Glasgow, then people don't have to go to London. And the people who can afford to go to London and join the industry are people who have, by and large, the bank of mum and dad behind them. And that just increases social exclusion. So the more you can build up the industry all across the UK, then the more you can really tackle bringing people into the industry who couldn't normally afford, 6 months of being a runner on no wages or minimum wages in London.
Okay, does Claire or Neil want to come in on that?
Yes, no, I totally agree. I think with the issue we've got now is that I came through a mentoring scheme. I came from come from a working class background, and if it wasn't for a mentoring scheme, I wouldn't have made it into television. And I'm really keen that should be a huge part of every production. I think with us, we're a tiny production company, so our resources are very limited. So we can't take on a huge amount of people, but we have to do it with production. So with the first series of Guilt, we had a big ground level mentoring production that worked really well. It's much harder now with COVID because, as Alan says, without the offices, without the kind of face-to-face, it makes it a much more kind of separated production. And so to kind of incorporate someone into the working process of production when you're trying to work out the new working process makes it doubly difficult. But I'd say from our experience, certainly Screen Scotland and their help on the first series of Guild was a real help for us in terms of bringing people in. And that was, the first series we very much centred on production. This series we're really trying to increase that on the editorial side. It has been slightly stymied by circumstance now, but we're working really hard to try and bring people through, because it's the only way. As Alan says, if you haven't got the bank of mum and dad, it's a really, really difficult industry to get into. And add to that not being based in Glasgow, London, it makes it really, really hard. So we're really keen to keep that thing going, because that's going to ultimately, the people that I've just been working with a script editor on a project, and she's new, and she came through a mentoring scheme, and she's brilliant. And I know that if I'm still working in the industry in 10 years' time, I'm going to be pitching to her, and you can see that she's a star of the future. But it's very hard at the moment to find the resource to bring those people through.
Thank you, Claire.
With everything the other panellists have said, I would also add that obviously training's a crucial part of that. In Scotland, we have a different ecosystem in terms of the talent pool available to us. We have to identify people either with existing experience that we can build on, or we have to build people's talents and abilities from within the base here. Unlike in London, where typically people move around production companies on a regular basis and they build their experience working through those different exposures to different types of productions. I think the addition of NFTS Scotland, TRC, NETS, the NETS training scheme, these are all great entities in their own right. I think there was a recent announcement, I think, about the Training Alliance coming together, bringing together all those different training providers, which I think is a good development, because very often it can feel like we have lots of training on the ground in Scotland, and as an employer and a production company, we often feel that we just need to navigate that in a way that makes it feel like it's a strategic thing, and that everyone is working together to identify what the gaps are. And I think they truly are now. So I think that's a good development. I think the BBC is crucial to this. A strong BBC in Scotland is absolutely essential. I came from a working class background. I had no friends or relatives in the television industry. I didn't anticipate I would be able to get a job. I managed to get a job at the BBC, and that was the start of my career, which exposed me to, a range of network opportunities. I think they are absolutely crucial, and maintaining their strength is crucial. But equally, maintaining a strong independent base with strong terms of trade, so we can all benefit from our rights positions, makes us all sustainable. And that, these are certain principles that have got to be maintained. I think in terms of diversity, we have lots of challenges to meet in Scotland. I think we also need to look at what diversity in Scotland looks like compared to the rest of the UK. But we have to change that in the same way that everyone else has to change it. The commissioning landscape, in terms of those people who are in positions of power, has to be as reflective of the Scottish population and ethnic mix as is the case in the rest of the UK. And, I think we've got a way to go there, really. So, yeah, there are some challenges. I think in terms of socioeconomic entrance, that really worries me because of the level of unemployment that's about to hit young people. And I'm desperately sad about that, because I think that's a real disservice to the audience in terms of the stories that we can tell, because it's the same with diversity. It comes from point of view. If we don't have those people represented in positions of power, then we're not going to find those stories coming forward. That's got to be tackled.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think that's a really important point, and also the point of where we have new young talent, how, if they go away to London, or how do we ensure that they actually come back to Scotland with the skills and that they've learned, and especially in the climate and the possibility of considerable youth unemployment as well. So there's a lot to think about there. So that's the end of my questions. Thank you, Convener.
Annabel Ewing.
Thank you, Convener, and good morning, colleagues, and to our panel. A very interesting discussion we've been having. Returning briefly to the issue of decommissioning, just for the record, because we'll have the BBC in due course. I think it was the head of content a couple of years ago who said that more commissioning editors would be located in Scotland. In terms of your experience in the last couple of years, has there been a marked change in that regard or not? Perhaps I could go to Alan Clements first.
Bluntly, no. If you think there was Joe Street in daytime and Shoulder Peak, Craig Hunder in Specialist Factual, and Gaynor Holmes as a commissioning executive in drama. There is now Neil McCallum has replaced Joe Street, who's gone to Channel 4. Craig has been replaced by 2 commissioners in London, and obviously Gaynor's still there in drama. But it's not just the people being there, it's them being empowered, because broadcasting, all the broadcasters work on what's called a 2-tick approach. So 1 tick is the commissioning editor saying, we want this production, and the other tick is the channel controller saying it works for my schedule. And we need people in Scotland who can get that crucial first tick, which is absolutely critical to moving a production forward. So no, that if anything, it's gone backwards, I would have said. And as I say, I'm a huge supporter of the BBC, but I can't say they have done that as well as they could have.
Thank you for that clear answer. Obviously, I appreciate for you guys it's difficult because the BBC is somebody that you hope to get work from, so I understand that you want to answer as best you can, but you've also got to think to the future and future commissioning. Claire made a point a moment ago about, Claire Mundell, about the need for a strong BBC in Scotland, and I'm sorry to be controversial, I just wanted to raise an important issue in terms of extending the pot, and that of course is the licence fee spend. So I think it's about 85% of the licence fee raised in Scotland is spent in Scotland. Would it not be better if it was 100%? There'd be a bit more money to go around. Perhaps I could go to Claire.
Yes, I'm a producer. I'll always accept more money. 100% of what we raise in Scotland should be spent in Scotland. I agree. I think that's absolutely right. I think, it's a balance, isn't it? Because ultimately, quotas aside, we are selling a product to a buyer, and we need to provide products that buyer wants. And we have to balance these two things in careful and delicate ways all the time. I think in scripted, we do have in the commissioner, the commissioning editor on the ground for drama in Scotland, someone who passionately supports Scotland, someone who is Scottish, lives in Scotland, knows the crew base and the talent base in Scotland, and therefore is inevitably in a stronger position to bat for Scotland. I think the structural issue, regardless of who the individuals are, the structural issue is about power and whether or not there's any portion of the budget which could be fully devolved. And I don't just mean for Scotland, I mean for nations and regions. Now that's a really radical suggestion, and not one that's likely to be taken up, I don't imagine. But again, we know that one of the things we have to do in nations and regions is portray Scotland. So, and there is in fact a portrayal fund for Scotland. Is there any way that we could look at the possibility of a portion of the overall budget being fully devolved to Scotland for network production? Obviously, we already have that for opt-out, but where we are making stories which reflect our culture, could we argue for a portion of that overall budget to be fully actionable in Scotland, where all ticks would happen in Scotland? That would make a difference, and it could make things move faster. Will it happen? I don't know, but I would be supportive of that. But I also do, I think we have to remember that we are here to provide projects that a buyer wants to buy. So the quotas are brilliant and they absolutely support the industry. But let's not forget that nobody wants to be commissioned because of a quota. We want those quotas to be very much, almost to disappear, to be honest, because the industry here and the product that we make is world class, and that commissioners don't see the quota. All they see is the production companies they want to work with and the shows they want to commission. So it's our job to kind of balance that as producers. But I often feel that some additional fully devolved power would be an amazing difference, and probably, not just for us, but for the other nations as well. I don't know if that will ever happen in the BBC's commissioning system, but there's a suggestion.
That sounds good to me, a very positive suggestion there. I've got another line of questioning, and what I would like to do, convener, if I may, is to embark on that. It's my second question. Sorry? It's my second question.
Neil Webster's indicating in the chat bar.
I was going to go to Neil. What I was going to do is just ask the second question, go to Neil, pick up on that question, second question, and then go back to Alan and Claire, if that's okay, just to round that up in as speedy way as possible. So to go to Neil on that issue, but also to raise a wider issue, which is, reference has been made to international work and perspectives, and it would be interesting to hear what all panellists feel about the opportunities there and what more could be done, and who would need to do more. Is there a role for government in that regard? Because of course everybody wants to see a very successful, thriving Scottish sector, including in terms of the international opportunity. So if I could go to Neil on the earlier issues and that as well, thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, on the earlier issues, to speak to the question of commissioners and how that's changed. We have quite a narrow brief as we're scripted, so I can echo that. Like Gaynor is incredible at drama, and then we deal a lot with Gavin Smith, obviously through Steve Carson, Gavin Smith, and Gregor Sharp, and they've all been incredible, and they know their markets. They've got, everybody's got a tough job, particularly at the moment, and resources are stretched and been further stretched by the kind of shutdown of production. And I think the BBC is like anybody you're working with, there can be kind of thorny issues, and there's some box, but there's still the first port of call for us. Definitely, there's still the best breadth of opportunity, and they've still got the biggest commitment, I think, in terms of PSBs, in terms of nurturing new talent and having that part of their business still very much front and centre. So I think it's important to make that point. Sorry, what was your second point, Annabelle? Your second question?
Well, I had also asked about, should 100% of the licence fee raised in Scotland not be spent in Scotland, which might give us a bit of a bigger pot, and also international opportunities.
Oh yeah, sorry, but the international opportunities, I think international opportunities come back to telling stories that work internationally. I think that's the thing. I think that's telling stories from Scotland that resonate around the world. I think that's as much as you can do in terms of you're trying to get international buyers. Everything now in terms of budgets, increasingly, certainly for us, it's all about having a distribution advance, which goes into selling these internationally. Often the distribution advance is topping up a production fee, the license fee from the broadcaster. So it's really important that we're kind of outward facing. I think drama, everyone talks about the boom time in drama. For us, comedy is much harder internationally because it's, by its nature, speaks to a domestic audience. The things that we find colloquially funny aren't necessarily things that translate to international audiences. So I think it's increasingly we have to think more internationally because that's where a lot more of the funding's coming from. How that played out, it comes down to essentially the stories you're telling, I think.
Alan.
Important questions, and yeah, I think they're both really important questions, Annabelle. And going back to the first one, none of this is a criticism of the people involved. I would echo what Claire and Neil say about Gaynor. She's been absolutely so supportive of Marcus and our drama team in getting product away. I'm wanting to give them more power, not take their power away. I think they should have more autonomy being based in Scotland. And I would say that you as a committee, and I'm sure as a parliament, this whole year and all of next year, people are going to ask you for money. The two things I'm going to suggest to you don't cost a single penny. Decentralising power does not cost any money. Setting quotas and enforcing them does not cost a single penny to the broadcasters involved or to the public purse, but they would make a material difference to the industry here. And on the international question, again, the more autonomy, for example, BBC Scotland has, the more it can be part of, like the Canadian broadcasters do, like the Australian broadcasters do. They can be the anchor tenant of a programme that works for their audience, but also might have an international reach. I would encourage them to do that. I mentioned, and also the cinema doc that we're doing, and it's about a Scottish mercenary who was sent to kill Pablo Escobar. Now that is a brilliantly Scottish story in one way, but also has a big international resonance. So we could raise most of the money internationally, as well as through BBC Scotland. And there's another we're working on that's been supported by Screen Scotland, based on a Scottish author, their book, but it's about a major American icon, and we're raising most of the money in America. And it's that spirit of entrepreneurship that I think I would really encourage the PSBs to have. And the more autonomy they would have in their decision making, the easier it would be to do that in a Scottish context and not always have to defer to London for that decision.
Okay, thank you. Very interesting. And Claire, last word to you.
Yeah, and I just wanted to come in on in a sort of related matter to that, which is that I also think whilst we're here to take Scottish stories to the world and to the rest of the UK and to ourselves. I think also we try to think of ourselves as a great production company based in Scotland rather than a Scottish production company. I think there's a sea change that has to happen where Scottish production companies can just as easily make a story set in London, but we make it here instead of in London. Scotland doubles for lots of different countries and towns and cities, and again, I come back to like wealth generation and where the IP sits and is owned. It's perhaps a controversial suggestion because it's turning lift and shift on its head, but I don't want us to be in a position where Scottish production companies are only commissioned to make Scottish stories, because that doesn't help anybody and that's not inclusive. We are production companies, we're based in Scotland, and it doesn't matter internationally that we're based here versus anywhere else. It doesn't matter when we speak to Americans, when we speak to European partners. We recently opened an office in Australia. We have a development producer down there, and that's us expanding into another English-speaking market that has synergies with Scotland. So I just think sometimes we need to be careful that we don't put ourselves into a one-way ghetto of only making one type of content.
Okay, fair point, and thank you very much. That was very interesting. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you very much, Annabelle. And we can now move on to Stuart Stevenson for his questions.
Thank you very much, Convener. Let me just pick up on something Claire's just said in recent interchange there. She said buyers want to buy, and they want something that is worth buying. We're obviously looking at the role of commissioning and sustaining an industry in Scotland, but I want to just shift a little bit to the issue of creativity. Because without creativity, I can't imagine we would have a successful industry and legislators and hold governments to account. I just want to hear from the panel what barriers there are to our being genuinely creative, or are we simply too often picking up ideas that are coming from elsewhere, developing them into something that's saleable and producing the product. And given that Claire Mundell I've just referenced, and of course her job title is Creative Director, perhaps I might start with Claire.
Thanks, Stuart. Yeah, I mean, I think we have a great creative base in Scotland, but it's also quite significantly untapped often, I feel. The barriers are money, access, opportunity, distribution, influence and power. And the things that we're discussing in relation to enhanced devolved power would help that pipeline. I think Screen Scotland are doing a really good job actually in terms of trying to shift and continually move along Scotland's creativity in all genres, not just in, at one time they were very much focused on film. They've now expanded their remit to television and also to factual areas and not just, drama. They're doing what they can, again, with limited resources. There's never enough money to go around for any of these things. Barriers are entry to the industry, the things we were talking about earlier on, social inclusion, diversity. In Scotland, in the past, I think barriers have also been about geography, but Zoom has changed that for all of us. I think it's about incentives that will drive production to places. As soon as we are driven to go to certain places, we look for talent in those areas. We look for talent all over Scotland as it is, but there is a way that you can balance that search with structural mechanisms that push us to look for people who can deliver projects. Look at what happened with the growth in the Gaelic community after the establishment of Salma Rostig, and the number of new entrants to the industry that were trained as a result of those initiatives. These things do make a difference. They take a long time to play out. I think that we have no shortage of talent. It's not talent that's the issue. It's the access to opportunity, really, and that's a myriad challenge.
Thank you, Claire. It's really quite fascinating. I mean, I'm not a creative at all in this sense, but ended up at school with a range of people who at school showed no signs. I was at school with Artie Tresize, Rob Noakes, John Bett, Nina Mishkoff and Linda Miles, all of whom have made significant contributions to the creative industries. Let me move to Alan Clement. And ask him his response to creatives. And indeed, I've just realised I've got a pitch I can make to him related to research I've been doing about what happened to people who were sentenced to transportation, because I happen to have some stuff related to someone who employed the people transported, and a lot of stuff about people who were transported. There's some wonderful, wonderful Scottish stories and all that, but that's for another day, Alan. The more general issue of barriers to our being able to leverage the creative abilities that we have, and how that interacts with our ability to get commissions, because the commissioning is the focus of our inquiry.
Stuart, I look forward to receiving that pitch and that information very much. And I would say about Artie and Silla's Singing Kettle blighted much of my life when my children were small. So I heard their singing. But, so on the issue of creativity, I'm going to echo Claire and go back to it's about cash and it's about power. And what we did when we set up Two Rivers, we raised a lot of capital, and I think we're the only company in Scotland that's done a lot of private capital. And these people are not misty-eyed romantics about Scotland. What they saw was a business opportunity to build a production company of scale in Scotland, serving Scotland, of course, but the UK network and the international market. And that's what we fully intend to do. And to Claire's point, what we did was we brought a number of people from London, a couple of Scots coming home, but people who had no connection to Scotland. But they saw the opportunity here because of those quotas, because the moves the PSBs were making to create real quality shows, real value for themselves. And why I hired those people was they had access, they had connections, but two of them had been commissioners at respectively Channel 4 and the BBC. And so the problem Scotland faces, it doesn't have people at that level. It has lots of creativity, lots of talent, but it often doesn't have people at that senior level who have got the experience of making big shows and have the connections at the highest level. And to Claire's other point, I think it's really important, and I've spoken about this before, there's a cultural and there's what I would call an industrial issue around television. So my previous company, STV Productions, makes Antiques Road Trip, all made in Scotland. It's no more a show about Scotland than Flying in the Air, but it's incredibly valuable to the Scottish industry. The same, my company before this is a benefit of being really old. The company before that, IWC, the same with location. Incredibly, it's not a show about Scotland, but it's all made in Scotland. So we need both. We both need the cultural representation of people telling our stories, using our creativity, but we also need those industrial shows that underpin so much of the industry here.
That's interesting. I suspect from my lofty age, I regard you, Alan, as a mere youngster, but there we are. I first appeared in front of a BBC camera in 1962, so I've got 58 years of very bad broadcasting habits to undo. Neil Webster, I want to come to you on the issue of creativity, and I just make the passing observation that as I look out the window here in Banshire, it's a beautiful blue sky day, which provided the cameraman gets it right, the and deals with the contrast that comes with that. It'd be an excellent day for doing some camera work here. And actually, during this meeting, I've just got an invitation from Al Jazeera to do some stuff with them, new stuff, of course. So, Alan, again, in relation to creativity, because it's a relatively small company, I suppose creativity is very much at the heart of the offer that you're making to the broadcasters.
Yes, it's a beautiful day here in Forres as well, so we could shoot here as well. Yeah, I think the truth of the matter is that what barriers are there to creativity? There are no barriers to creativity with creative people. Some terrible ideas, but millions of brilliant ideas that come to me the entire time. I think just to reiterate what Alan and Claire said, there's no barriers to ideas, there's barriers to execution, and idea and execution go hand in hand, and that just comes back to money, time, influence, and the power. And I think that's been covered extensively, and I think that's what we're always going to face. There are every day there are great ideas, and don't feel free to send me your idea as well. If I'd like to have a look at it. But every day I meet people and they've got great ideas, and the execution is the big thing. So having more power and more resources is the way forward.
Thank you to all three, and convener, I think we've covered the area I wanted to cover without the necessity of further questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Stuart. We shall now move on to our last member, Kenneth Gibson.
And one of the important things that's come out today is obviously the importance of direct PSB funding. However, I noticed that in the Ofcom Media Nations report in 2020, that has declined by around a quarter between 2007 and 2019. So I'm just wondering, given the importance of this to independent production companies, what the panel feel about the likely continued decrease in PSB funding in the years ahead. The impact will be. I don't know if Alan wants to go first.
Yeah, I think and obviously there's been a major conference this week, Ofcom conference on the future of PSB, which I've been dropping me in and out of, and I think that the PSBs are clearly going to be a declining force over the next decade as the SVODs and others gain in power, but they're still going to be massively, massively important to the industry here in Scotland, and I think when all those debates around the BBC moving to a subscription service, or indeed the idea being floated very strongly by John Whittingdale about the privatisation of Channel 4, I don't think are incredibly helpful right now, to be honest. And so it's about managing that decline so it's a nice, gentle, slow one, and obviously maximising Scotland's position within.
Okay. Do either of the other panellists want to comment on that, Neil or Claire?
Hi. I totally agree. I think we're all noticing the decreased funding and the way that increasingly production budgets have to be kind of multi-funded. And for us as a tiny company, we're probably quite unusual in that we're not really about growth as much as about sustainability. We work production to production, and we exist on production fees, and that across the board that's becoming increasingly untenable because the pots are getting smaller, and so that traditional old-fashioned idea that you make a show and you take a profit off the top is becoming kind of kicked further and further into the future for us, where suddenly you're putting money in from your advance, for your distribution advance. You're maybe taking a cut of the production fees. This is certainly true in comedy. Drama, there's still a little bit of give for us there. But I think we can't underestimate, to reiterate what Alan said, that that the BBC is the strongest and best place for us to go for work, and it's still going to be a huge force in the years coming. Anything we can do to kind of maintain and defend that, I think we should be doing.
Okay, thanks. I'll actually, I don't, unless Claire wants to comment, I'll move on and ask her the next question, if that's okay.
Yeah,
That's great.
Claire? Yeah, okay. Well, sticking with the PSB, the Memorandum of Understanding between Screen Scotland and the BBC agreed in 2019 set out shared ambitions such as nurturing Scottish talent, stimulating production growth and extending the range of Scottish film and television, etc. And there were a number of commitments made which included delivering its commitment to open up 100% of television content to competition by 2027, other than where it is not value for money to do so. So can you advise how that's going to be determined and what impact you feel that will have on your company and others like
it? Well, I understood that some of the qualification for that was around where it is perceived the market in Scotland cannot provide relevant competition. So in the arena of live broadcasting or live events, possibly in children's, which needs a certain, centre of excellence, I suppose. I mean, I don't think there's any area that we can and we shouldn't compete for. This notion of only being allowed to compete for a certain section of the pie, I just think is very outdated thinking. And you cannot make any drama funded from one commissioner. We are out in the market every day, and we make feature films as well, which is a completely entrepreneurial activity. And we do it all from Glasgow, and it is not an issue in any way, shape or form. But I think we do have to push against any structural barriers to growth, because we're in a different world now, and even as I said at the beginning of this evidence session, we're in a completely different world, obviously for all of us, but specifically in our world of film and television, we're in a different world as well, because London is no longer, the centre of the universe as it was even in January this year for commissioning. London creatives and production companies are beginning to recognise that they can do their business anywhere. They don't have to be in London either. So, I think we've seen a major shift, and my hope is that whenever we return to whatever normal looks like, that we don't all just revert to how we used to operate, because we are all proving every day that it doesn't matter where we are based, and that applies to other parts of Scotland as well. So, as I say, my understanding about the value for money thing is around the perception of what it would take an independent company to be able to compete with certain expertise in-house within BBC, within the BBC, as it were, in the sections of the BBC that are not in the commercial domain. But I would open it all up for competition. At the end of the day, the PSBs, and we should also talk about Channel 4, ITV, and Channel 5. These are all entities where we can still retain rights, and we must protect that at all costs, because that is what builds value and sustainability. The streamers are wonderful for relatively large production fees, but even those are under pressure, and with COVID they'll be under greater pressure. But we don't own any rights there, and we need to be in the position where we are constantly building businesses that are that have value for the future, with incoming rights positions that are strong.
And just to follow what you've actually said there, Claire, I think it's interesting that you said up until January, it seemed as if London was the centre of the universe. It takes me back to my childhood when it seemed that every Doctor Who alien invasion always used to centre on London. But in the MOU, one of the pieces that we have here says that one of the agreements was to, and I quote, ensure commissioners with decision-making power in a range of relevant genres visit Scotland to communicate their ambition and programming needs. And we've already had considerable discussion on commissioning, but it almost seems to me as if this is like a royal visit, almost getting a visit from a commissioner in the pre-kind of COVID era. Was it like that, or was it somewhat, or was it even more significant for the industry?
do you want me to continue? I mean,
Yes.
so I started, 20 odd years ago, and I can remember the royal visits from the Commissioner, and, being on best behaviour and taking them out to dinner. But, what difference is that to any other business, to be honest, where, we operate like that in any field of business, I suppose. But yes, I mean, there's a certain patrician aspect to that. I think in scripted, we're lucky that our Commissioner is very plugged into the team, and we have a direct relationship with the Commissioner when it comes to the BBC, and with the other Commissioners across the other channels. We build those relationships. Relationships are so key. I mean, I bang on about this to new entrants all the time, but that relationship that you make 10 years ago might take exactly that length of time to play out. And I think that's why, amongst our young people, we've got to get them into the industry, because unless they can start building those relationships, they won't see them pay off. But yeah, I completely remember the visits to Scotland, and I mean, what can you do about it? I mean, it still happens, and I'm sure it still happens in other genres, but face-to-face contact with any buyer is not a bad thing. So we take quite a sort of pragmatic view of that, and it's always been the way. But I think that Zoom actually changes that a lot, because now they don't need to travel, and we don't need to travel, and we're having really meaningful conversations with commissioners who are based all over the place at the moment. So I think if there's any upside to what we're all experiencing, it's that there's been a democratisation of access. But you can only get that access if you've got relationships, and that's where we need the power structures to support our young people in the industry to be able to build those relationships themselves.
Okay, and Convener, if I may just move on just a wee bit further, just on this issue, I was just going to ask Alan another question, and then just one from Neil, if that would be okay. Alan, the issue of Ofcom's regional production and regional programme definitions talks about substantive business and production base outside the M25, and there's no minimum number of individuals who need to be employed at that substantive base. It's dependent on what delivers a genuine operational production office in the locality in which it's based. I mean, it seems to me almost as if the kind of London-centric dominance of the industry, if you like, is having to be forced out. Do you agree with Claire that the kind of things are now changing rapidly because of COVID, and do you feel that the greater use of Zoom and etc. will perhaps put some of these kind of structures into kind of abeyance, and that we might have a much more open and democratic way in which television, etc., is produced in Scotland in the future?
I would hope so, and I'm an optimist. As Claire says, I don't think you can be, if you don't like hearing the word no, you're in the wrong business, so I think you have to be an optimist and drive on through. And also, I've both enjoyed and endured the patrician visits from the London controllers. It is better, no question, and I think they now take it very seriously in a way they didn't before, and there's been many, many waves of really and I think they really do mean it this time, and I think Ofcom is on it. Personally, I think the strictures should have been tougher, and that's what I argued for to Ofcom. I think there's been a lot of, let's be generous, bending of the rules, and I think Ofcom has been much stricter at enforcing them now. And I hope that, but I'm with Claire, that we want people to come and live and work in Scotland, and relocate to Scotland. I think that is a brilliant thing. And I don't have any issue with companies that come and do it and mean it. I have no problem with that at all. And I think it is better, and I am an optimist. And I do think Zoom has democratised things, but power is still power, and you've got to devolve power. And you, of all people, would know that. You have to devolve power, and you have to have rules, because if you base it on the fact that somebody's nice about it now, like Ben Frow at Channel 5 really cares about it now, but it might not be Ben Frow in 3 or 4 years. And so if you have regulations in place, then that holds people's feet to the fire to make sure they do it.
Yeah, so a change effectively at the boardroom level of a company like Channel 5 could mean a completely different approach if, for example, regulations weren't put in tablets of stone, so they're still essential for the industry in Scotland.
So ITV has an out of London quota of 50%, which is mostly eaten up by the soaps, made in Granada and in Yorkshire, right? So, but if you said it's got a nation's commitment, and let's say that's 8 or 9% for Scotland, that would be a massive, cost-free, taxpayer-free boost to the industry in Scotland, and would focus ITV to look at Scotland in a way that it doesn't mean they don't. I got on very well with Joe Clinton Davis. I know Kevin well. It's not about that, but it means that if the people change, if the personnel changes, you've got a structure to rely on.
Thanks, and that just moves me seamlessly on to the question I was going to ask Neil, which was just about STV, which doesn't have a specific independent production quota under its licence. And I'm just wondering, Neil, if you feel that would make a significant difference in Scotland.
I'll be honest, it's probably time for me to come clean and say that I wasn't born in Scotland. I don't know if anyone's noticed.
No,
I'm a good example of someone who has who has left London, come up here and trying to start a substantive base up here and make a living up here. So just to go back to what Alan said, I think the devolution of power up here is the key element. I think there's a slight. I slightly worry about the notion that at the moment the knock-on effect of COVID and the democratisation of that's forced us all onto Zoom is definitely a good thing. But I think we should be wary that could quite easily revert back. On a kind of on a kind of bigger level, we all hope there's going to be a vaccine. We all hope there's going to be whatever the new normal is, whatever a return is. But I think this has been a glimpse as to what can happen in the future, but it's not necessarily what will happen once this all reverts back to an earlier version of how we've had how the commissioning structures have worked. So I think that's an important thing, that we should be building on this now, but with an eye to thinking that this may not be the future version of commissioning. As regards to STV, on Kenneth, I think I'm probably not in the best position to answer that question, as my experience up here has been predominantly the BBC so far. So it might be better for Alan.
If Claire or Alan want to answer it, I'm happy with that. Claire?
Do you want me?
Yeah. I think Alan talks about it quite a bit in his written submission.
Yeah,
he did.
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking I'm probably legally bound on what I can actually say about STV, but no, it would be a useful thing to do. But the real, they're not a significant spender on the creative and cultural industries in Scotland, and so it would be a useful thing to do, but I don't think it would make a material difference the way a quota on ITV would, which is somewhere between 900 million and £1 billion of spend, because what STV spends is quite low cost, and most of what they want to do is in-house. So it would be useful because it'd make them think about it, but I don't think it would be material. No.
ITV would be much better. Okay, that's great. Thanks very much, Convener. I appreciate that, and thank you very much, panel.
Okay, thanks very much, Kenneth. If I could just pick up on the STV thing. They do very little commissioning, and as you say, Alan, they don't have a great deal of money. But STV were in front of this committee a year or so ago when they were proposing a significant number of redundancies, and their defence was that they were actually going to be investing in more programming. But our research shows that the number of hours produced for Scottish audiences by STV has fallen by 41%, and the majority of that is in the non-news, non-current affairs category. Is it time for more pressure to be put on? Does Ofcom need to intervene? STV has traditionally been a really important part of the Scottish cultural landscape, and it seems to me that, despite what they told the committee last year, they're making a lot less and they're investing a lot less. Alan is the formula. I don't know how much to say is on the senior.
Yeah, I'm thinking about my legal agreement with STV about what I could probably say. I think that's a shame, and I think the more they can contribute to the Scottish creative sector, the better. And I would reiterate what I said. I think if the quota sits with them, it would be useful, but not material. I think it's also a shame my successor is London based, and I think that is a shame when we're asking people to devolve power to the nations. That we have one of the biggest production companies in Scotland, if not the biggest, having a London-based managing director, I think is not a great optic. But again, it's a commercial decision for them, and it's not for me to criticise them. It's up for them to decide.
So they've got a London-based managing director. We knew that, but you said your successor's based.
As a London, yes. No. Sorry. The managing director of STV Productions is London-based. Now, I think the chief exec now lives in Scotland, but I don't know. I don't follow it that closely, Joan. It's not really my issue.
Okay, I'll move on. I think we've got a supplementary from Ross.
Thanks, Convener. It was actually covered quite well by Claire in a previous point in relation to Screen Scotland's role. I mean, if anyone has any burning final point they want to add about the role of Screen Scotland right now, feel free, but the specific question that I had was covered very well, actually.
No, Ross, I think it is really important to say, and it echoes a bit of what Claire was saying, was because I've been a long time in the industry, screen processors were incredibly focused on theatrically distributed film and the film industry in Scotland, and they have now, since the big report and the work of this committee, they now have a proper, real focus on the television industry, which is incredibly welcome. And I think I have to say, in my experience in the last few years, they're doing a great job.
Great.
I'm not hearing Claire. We don't seem to have any sound.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Yeah. I was just going to follow on from what Alan said there. I think there's been a pendulum swing with Screen Scotland. I've been involved with every iteration, well, not everyone, but I think at least 4 iterations of the national funding body in Scotland, because we cut across film and scripted. And I think, previously it was weighted, perhaps too much in one way. I think there's definitely been a kind of rebalancing of that. I just would make a plea also not to forget about film, because building film, a healthy, sustainable, ambitious film sector also does build talent, and it takes new voices, writers' voices, directors' voices out to the international landscape. Strangely, in this time as well, we are seeing, in the scripted arena, we are seeing, and it might not last, but there is a little bit of a window of opportunity for film in a new way now, because it's a shorter period of production. It is a less risky scenario in terms of the actual production aspects of it. If you're not making a series that requires you to shoot over, 6-8 months or whatever. And interestingly, international investors who would typically be investing in very significant American feature films don't have things to invest in anymore, and they are surprisingly looking around the world and at Scotland about what we've got on our slate and what all of our companies can offer as potential investment opportunities. So, we also just need to make sure we don't forget about film, because it's got a huge role to play, and I think it's we have to keep all these things in alignment.
I'd just like to add with Screen Scotland. Obviously, my relationship is much newer, much more recent. I've only been dealing with them for the last 2 or 3 years, but they've been, from the perspective of a small production company, they've been invaluable. They've been really helpful. in terms of helping us make connections as a new company, and the decision-making process has been really quick. And without them, Gilt wouldn't have happened for us. And they backed it early and they backed it fully. And I think they've been doing a really good job from our perspective.
Great, thank you.
Thanks very much. I think that's more or less us covered all the bases now. Can I thank all three of our witnesses for coming along today and sharing their views with us. It's been very interesting and very helpful to the committee's work. So thank you very much for that. We now come to the end of our public session, and excuse me, I will just allow a couple of minutes for members to have a break before we resume in private session. But again, thank you very much to all our witnesses for joining us today. We now move into private session. Thank you.